Now that we've got the main build of our website done, it's time to take our website to the next level by adding some fancy animations and interactions. And in this video, we're going to do that and explore Webflow's native animation and interactions capabilities. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do here is we've got this image here and it actually looks like two layers. Now, right now, this is just like a single image. But what I want to do is I want to separate them into two different layers, two different images, so that I can play around with them and kind of create this. One of them I just want to rotate, and the other one maybe to react to my mouse to create this kind of like yoga wavy vibe to it. So let's see how we're going to do that. First step is to actually upload these two separate images separately. So let's go ahead and do that. We have it in our homepage, hero, back and front. So they are actually separated. Let's bring them together. And now let's think, how are we going to make them look exactly like this, so one on top of the other, when they're actually separated? And if you've watched the previous videos, you know that we're about to use a wrapper and then some absolute positioning to give these two images layers. So let's see what we have right now. Right now we have a header image. Let's make this the front image. So let's just replace this. And now we have actually the front image. And then now we want to bring in another image here. So actually let's copy and paste this image. Now you see it's underneath it. And let's bring back the back image here. And I think we can give this actually a different class. So I'm going to remove this and I'm going to call this hero back image. Okay, now this image, we want it to be under this one. So we have to change its position to absolute. However, we want to make sure that it's not relative to the body, which is right now. We want to make sure that it's relative to the parent wrapper. So this is image wrap. And we're going to have to set that into relative so that now this absolute is going to be relative to it, right? And now I can do fill, and it's going to fill up this space. I can actually do this maybe like 100% and 100% just to make sure that it's filling up that space. Now, how are we going to make the other image on top of it? One thing I can try is to put this on top, and this doesn't work, but sometimes it works because basically the HTML renders first and then it renders the other thing afterwards. So the other thing that, if that's not working, the other thing that we can do is to take the header image, also turn that. We don't have to turn it into absolute. We can just turn it into relative. And by doing that, we get access to the Z index, but we don't even have to do that. It was actually automatically basically fixed. Now I wonder, it looks a little bit big, and I wonder if we want to add a little bit of an image padding to the wrapper just to make that a little bit smaller. Something like this, maybe 25 pixels this way. And actually, let's take the background, the back image, and let's actually make this 90% instead of 100. That looks okay to begin with. Now yeah, I think it's good. We're going to make it rotate so that these brown shapes are going to pick at different times. Okay, so we've got the first step done, which is we've got now two layers which we can animate separately. Now, the first thing I want to do is just to get this back shape to rotate very slowly all of the time, looping. So how are we going to do this? Now I'm going to go into the interactions panel. Now, basically, there's two ways that we can trigger interactions or animation. One of them is if something happens to an element, so that's an element trigger. And the other thing is if something happens on the page. Now, because we want this to be a looping animation that happens all the time, we don't have to do anything to trigger this animation. That basically means that it's going to be a page trigger whenever the page loads. This animation is going to, once the page is loaded, it's going to run all of the time. So under page trigger, I can see that I have a bunch of options here. Mouth move, not relevant. While page is scrolling, not relevant. Now we have page load and page scroll. So what we're looking for is page load. So this is going to be triggered when the page is load. I'm going to select that. And you see we've got two different stages of the page load. When the page starts loading or when the page finishes loading. In this case, because we have a very simple image here in the background, I want this to start rotating immediately. So let's do when page starts loading, we're going to start off this animation. Now we don't have an animation created yet, so we're going to set create an animation. Now we've got a bunch of them ready yet already because of some of the components that we've brought in already have some interactions like the accordion, menu, drop downs, and model, but none of these is what we want. We have to create something custom. So we're going to come here into the animation, create a new one. We're going to call this hero. Let's call this shape rotate, just so that we know rotate. Okay, so now what do we want? The first thing we have to do is select what element do we want to animate. In this case, yeah, it's the hero back image. So I'm making sure that this one is selected. And now I'm adding basically an animation. In this case, these are all the properties that I can animate. And what I want to do is set this to rotate. So now it's rotating. It's giving me this icon that basically means, hey, you didn't give me any properties to rotate. What I want to do is go here. Now I can rotate on multiple axes, right? We can have some 3D rotation here, but I'm looking for a very simple rotation, something like this. And now I can see how it looks when I'm rotating it. And maybe I want to push it a little bit more to the side. So we'll do this a little bit later on. But let's start by rotating this 360 degrees, which is a full circle. Okay, now it's asking me how long, what's the duration of this animation? Currently it's half a second, which means it's going to be super fast. Let's hit play to see it. Whoop, very, very fast. I want to make this very slow. Let me try 40 seconds and I'm going to hit play. Okay, this is very slow, and slow is good. This is yoga, should be chilling. So this actually looks very, very good. We've got this slow animation in the background, possibly unnoticeable. It's pretty good. And you can see here, while we're playing, you can see here, what time is it? Okay, so we're good. This animation is basically done. I can hit save. Now, one thing that I want to do is I want to hit this loop check mark right here, because I don't want this to just rotate once over 40 seconds and then stop. I want this to always be rotating. So hit that. Now we're good. I can close this and I can go ahead and preview the website. And now you can see this is rotating in the background. This was very simple, and it's going to loop, and that's going to happen all the time. I do want to move the position a little bit so that it's a little bit more visible. So let's go ahead and pick the image and see how we can move that around. Now I can start playing around with this position a little bit and start seeing, maybe if I push this a little bit on the left and a little bit down, maybe this looks better. And maybe instead of 90%, because I made it smaller, let's change it to maybe 93%. Okay, so now it's a little bit bigger, and now I can take it up a little bit, maybe 92. Okay, just playing around with this. Let me play this. Okay, this is nice. I think this is what I want. Fantastic. Okay, we've got the first part of this animation done. Now the second thing that I would like to do is when I'm hovering my mouse over this section, I want the foreground image to kind of react a little bit to my mouth and move a little bit with it. So how are we going to do this? Remember, we've got basically two options. Things that happen when we're doing something to an element and something that happens on the page. Now on the page, there's basically mouth moving in viewport. Now we can use this trigger to basically set up this animation, but my problem with using this is that this basically means, if I'll set the animation this way, that even after I'm scrolling here and I'm on here and I'm moving my cursor around, it's still calculating an animation on the top. So it basically requires more kind of like memory and using more of the computer's resources to animate something that we're not even seeing. And that's not a good practice. So let's limit this animation to whenever I am hovering my cursor over this section, because that's when we're going to see it. So just over this section. So in this case, I'm going to select an element trigger, and I'm going to do mouse over over element. Okay, so now note there are two things here. There are two types of animation. One of them is just mouse hover, which is basically means that if I'm hovering from outside into it, it's going to trigger some animation. This is very similar to what we're doing with buttons, right? When you hover on top of it, something would happen, and it happens once. However, in this case, that's not what we want. We want this, you can see this icon here with continuous interaction, it says below, because we want this to calculate the interaction as we're moving, and we want this to actually react to our mouse movement. So I'm going to select this mouse over element, the continuous one, and then I'm going to have to set up a new animation. So let's go ahead and create that. Now I'm going to call this hero mouse movement. All right. Now you can see here that now I actually have animations for two different areas. Mouse x-axis, top to, actually, sorry, left and right. X-axis is left to right. And mouse Y action is when the mouse is moving top to bottom. And I can define different things to happen when I move up and down or left and right. And of course, they will happen together. So again, to get started, I'm going to select the elements that I want to animate. In this case, it's this one, header 1 image is the front image. And let's start with the mouse X. So when I'm moving left and right. And let's add an animation, and let's add a move animation here. So now I'm adding, now you can see it was added 2 times. One at 0%, which is probably all the way to the left side of the screen, and then 100% probably all the way to the right. And I haven't set properties for this, so it basically tells me, hey, set something here. And down here below, I can set how I want to move this. Now, in this case, I want this to correlate to the mouse. So if I'm moving the mouse along the x-axis, I want the image to move alongside the x-axis. So I'm going to drag this. Now let's see what, I don't want this to be too extreme. So let's do minus 20 on the 0, and maybe on the 100% 20. So overall, between minus 20 and 20, there will be 40 pixels of movement when the mouse is moving. Now, I can preview how this looks and what is this animation doing if I turn on this live preview. So I'm clicking this, and now you can see, and note on the right side as I'm moving my cursor, you can also see where the percentage is. So you can see how the mouse is reacting to the movement, and we can decide whether this is too much, but I think this is actually great. Okay, fantastic. So let's head into the y-axis and add another movement here, and we're actually going to do the same. So we're going to do, when the y-axis is 0, my assumption is it's going to be at the top. We're going to move it a little bit to the top. So let's do the same here, minus 20. And when it's getting to the bottom, that's going to be 20. Let's preview that and see if that does what we want. Yep. Now note, when my cursor is up, then it's up. And when my cursor is down, it's down. So basically, and when I'm moving it, it's reacting. Now this looks pretty good. Let me save this. And let's preview the animation. So note that we've got two things happening at the same time. We've got the background rotating. We've got the front image reacting to my mouse. And that's pretty cool. That being said, I noticed there is a problem. And note what the problem is. When I'm hovering on top to the navigation bar, the image jumps right into position. And why is that? That's because the nav bar, let's see the structure. The nav bar is actually not inside of the section, which basically means that when I'm hovering on top of that, I'm not inside of the section, and that's why the animation is not triggering. So one thing I can do, and let me see if it works, I can just bring in the navbar inside of the section. And now, all of the animation that we're doing to the section is going to include the navbar as well, because it's part of the section. Let's see if that's working. Now we're here. Now we're on the navbar. Yep. And now the navbar is part of this animation. Okay, so I think we've got our first animation done. The next thing I want to animate is this wave that we have here down below. I think it can actually be pretty cool if it's kind of like moving alongside and you feel the wave. Now, this is actually a pretty common animation, and you might have seen this in a lot of places this way, where you basically have something that's infinitely kind of moving and it looks as if it's animating forever. This is called infinite marquee, and let's see how we're going to do this. First of all, I want to basically explain to you the mental model of how these animation can work. So let's jump into Keynote. And basically what I have is, first of all, I need to have something that repeats itself. So I will need to change the wave, because you can see here that the wave, the end on the left side, I'm not sure that it's going to fit perfectly to the end on the right side. I need a shape that is continuously kind of like a continuous pattern. Even here, the continuous pattern is basically either the same logo repeats itself or the same words repeat itself. In this case, we want a shape that can repeat itself. Now, what we want to do is we actually want to create a container for them, a wrapper for them, that is actually much, much longer, and that we have here basically a repeating pattern. So let's duplicate this and put this here at the end. So we basically have kind of like a repeating pattern. And what's going to happen is I will take this element and I'm going to basically animate this and move this around. And when it gets to the top here, it's basically going to jump here into here, but immediately, so people don't notice this because it happens immediately, and then it continues to move. Okay, so it feels as if it's moving forever, but it's basically just animating, jumping, animating, jumping. Now, if we're going to just build it this way, this is the mental model. This is what the animation is going to look like. But there's one more thing that we need to remember is that if we're actually going to create something like this, we're going to have this scroll bar at the bottom of the screen, which means we can scroll left and right because the content of the website is too wide. And we don't want this to happen. And so we're going to have to put all of this thing inside of another wrapper. And this wrapper needs to have basically overflow hidden. And we've talked about overflow hidden as in creating a mask to make sure that even if things go outside of it, we're not actually seeing it. This way, the website is still going to contain only the content that we have here in the middle, although we have some stuff here, but it's not visible, so it's not going to create this bug of having this horizontal scroll, which we don't want. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to create this. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of the actual wave that we have here, because we've set it up with kind of like a class. We have it as a background, see, section wave light. I'm going to just remove that for now. And instead, I need to bring in this element, this wrapper that sits at the bottom here. And how we're going to place it at the bottom and not disturbing all of the content that we have here, we'll have to position it absolute inside of this section. So let's add a div block here inside. Let's call this, let's add a div block. And this div block, let's call this wave wrapper, because it's going to wrap it. Now remember, we basically need two wrappers. We need the wrapper that's going to mask things, and then we have the wrapper that contains actually the wave itself. So this is going to be, let's say that this is the external wrapper, and then inside of it, let's add another div. Let's call it wave pattern, wave long pattern. Okay. Oh, sorry, I wanted to add a div, not rename it. Now I'll name it wave long pattern. Okay, so now we have, let's go back and seeing what we have. We basically have wave wrapper and wave long pattern. This wave long pattern, let's make it really long. Let's set the width of it to something like 6400, very wide. And the height, so I went ahead and, by the way, created a looping, basically a pattern of a wave. So I'm going to bring that in. And I need to know what is the size of this. So it's very important, because I will need to basically do the animation 2 times or maybe 1 time this animation, perfect animation, so 1600 pixels. And I want to know the height so that we have the same proportion. So that's 53 pixels. So let me set the height here to 53 was 53. And it doesn't, again, doesn't really have to be 640. It can be 2 times 1600, but I'm bad at math, so I'm just going to keep it this way. And what I want to do is give this a background image and upload this new wave. So let's upload this new wave. Okay, now previously we were always telling this not to tile, but this time I do want to tell it to tile. Now you can't see it, but now you can see that we have this very, very long area here where the wave kind of goes and patterns itself. Now you can see that I can scroll left and right because we didn't set the mask. We didn't set the wrapper, the wave wrapper, to overflow hidden. So that's what we need to make sure. We need to make sure that this wave wrapper is just 100% of the width of its parent, and it has overflow of hidden. Now you can't see me, but I try to scroll left and right and nothing scrolls. So now we basically have the mask that is just the size of the screen, 100% of the screen. Inside of it, we've got this very long pattern that is very long. It's extending to the left side, but we can't see it. And this wave wrapper, we also said that we want to set it to position absolute so that it's inside of the header section. Yeah, we need to turn the header section into relative so that we have the wave wrapper relative to it, and going to position it at the bottom so you can see it right here. Okay, so now we're using the concept that we've used before of position absolute to put it to align it to the bottom of this hero section without taking up space from these elements, putting it behind, and then inside we have this very long object that we've created. And now all we have to do is animate it. So let's see how we're animating it. What kind of an interaction would that be? We also want this to be something that's looping all of the time. Actually, perhaps I could have put this inside of the page load because it's the same, but for my best practice would be to separate this, just because if I want to control them or manage them separately, I'm just going to create another page load animation. Also, when page starts to loading, start this animation. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm calling this looping wave homepage. If I want to be consistent with the naming, I can give dashes here, although it doesn't really matter. Okay, and now what I want to do is I want to take this long pattern that we have, and I want to move it. And I want to move it, and we can see here left and right, I want to move it exactly, exactly one time, okay? So if I know that it's 1600 pixels, let's do minus 1600 pixels. And let's do this let's just do this 10 seconds so that we can see it. So let me play this. Okay, so now we're seeing it moving. And let's actually make this faster. Okay, now after it got to the end of it, we want to basically make it jump to its start position immediately. So let's duplicate this animation. Let's actually duplicate it, and then set the position back to 0, okay? And set the duration. Now, if I wouldn't touch anything, you would basically see this move to the left and then move to the right, right? But I want to set this duration to 0, so it happens immediately. And now I'm actually going to set this to like maybe 3 seconds just so that we can see it very fast. Let me hit play. Okay, so it's moving, and then we don't see, but when it got to the end, it jumped to the beginning, but because this is a looping, it looks just the same. So let me go ahead and save this, and now let's preview. And now it's moving. Let's see if we can figure out when it's jumping. We can't even see when it's jumping because it's looping exactly to the right position and starting up from scratch. So this is, now we have this infinitely looking animation that takes 3 seconds, and it just loops forever and ever. Okay, so yeah, I do want this to loop, but I do want this to take much longer so that it's chill and it's not kind of like too fast. All right, let's see how duration 20 looks like. I think that's okay. So let's save this. Let's preview our animation. Okay, so now we've got looping here in the background and this looping wave right here, infinite marquee of this loop, and this animation is now complete. The next animation I want to create is a loading animation, or a preloader as it might called, for the website. A lot of people think this is very cool to show kind of like a fade into the website experience. In other times when you just have a lot of content, imagery that takes up a lot to load, you don't want people to start scrolling the website before everything is loaded. So that's why a lot of people use preloader or loading animation. Other people might say that, it's not a great user experience to make people wait, and you should try to build a website as fast as possible so people can immediately read it. On whatever side of the discussion you are in, let's learn how to do this, because we're going to learn some very cool principles while we're doing it. So first of all, I want to explain my thinking on how I'm planning this, because this actually has a few components into it. Now, we've seen that when we're doing a loading animation, we have two stages: when the page starts loading and when the page actually finished loading. Now, in this case, what I'm imagining here is kind of like a fading into a white screen that has the word breathe kind of like expanding and contracting, kind of like the letters are kind of like breathing, kind of something like this. And when the website finished loading, then we're fading into the content, and the content kind of like nicely appear. So I'm going to use Keynote here to kind of like sketch out my process for this. So what we need to happen, it's actually, we have 4 different animation that we want to happen. When the page starts loading, first of all, we need to hide the screen, right? We need to hide it. So we need to show the loader and maybe fade in the word breathe. So that's a one-time animation that needs to happen immediately as the page starts loading. And then I don't know how long it's going to take to load up everything. We don't know this, so we need to have some kind of a looping animation. In this case, it's going to be the word kind of like expanding and contracting until the page is finished loading, and then we need to trigger the end of this whole thing, in which case we need to reveal the screen, so kind of like fade out of this loading animation, and then we also want to have the content itself animating in. So those are the stages, and let's go ahead and start creating it. And let's start with creating the loader and how it's going to look like. So let me think about how this is going to look like. We want basically to fill in the whole screen, so take over whatever is here. And we've basically seen how to do this when we were working with the pop-up. We basically need to have some kind of a wrapper that takes up the whole screen and is fixed position. So let's go ahead and create that. I'm going to bring in a div, and I'm going to call this inside of the page wrapper, but I don't need this to be inside of the main wrap. We can call this preloader wrapper, and we want this to be fixed position. We want this to take up everything, so 100% width, 100% height, and here on the position I'm going to set this full to take up the whole screen. Now we can't see anything, but let's go into the background and set the background to white, and now we can see that it's taking up everything. It's not on top of the navigation. So let's go into the Z index and set this to maybe 999. Okay, so now we're on top of everything else. So that is great. Now I want to have the word breathe kind of like centered in the middle of the screen. So first of all, let's bring in a text element, and I'm going to do text block, and I'm going to write here breathe. Okay, breathe. Now, how am I going to center this in the middle of the screen? Well, I'm going to make sure that the page wrapper is set to flex. Let's open up the layer to flex, and now we can align it to horizontal center and vertical center, both of these. Now it's in the middle of the screen. Now let's take this text block and actually let's call this breathe text, and let's just give this, let's make this much bigger, maybe like 5, and maybe let's do this backseam font. So that looks pretty good. I think this looks pretty good. Now, how can I animate the letters in and out? Basically, we have this property here with letter spacing, and maybe I could have done, something like this, but unfortunately, letter spacing is not being animated. I can't animate this from the Webflow UI. So what I have to do is I think I'm going to have to break down each of the letters and then put them inside of a wrapper and basically align them to the wrapper. Let me show you what I mean, and I think you will figure this out. So I'm going to wrap this text in a wrapper. So wrap in a div block. Actually, I can, let's do this, although I can basically wrap it in a horizontal flex box, because this is what I basically want. I want to have the letters. So let's actually copy that and let's have different elements here. So this brief text, let's copy, paste, 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 paste. Okay, I want these to be different elements. So breathe. Okay, so this is great. Now they're inside. Why do I need them in a flex box wrapper? Let's give this a class so that we can animate this. Let's call this breathe flex. Because now if I can give this a size, let's say 140. I don't know if that's, no, I need more than that. If this is now, let's say 380, I can justify the elements inside. And these are separate elements. So right now they are justified to the left, but I can justify them to the right, or center or right, or I can have space between, which is exactly what I want, because now, the Flexbox arranges them with equal spacing in between. And if this is bigger, they're going to have more space. And if this is smaller, they're going to have less space. And the width of this breathe flex is something that we can animate. So now we can basically animate just the width of this wrapper, and it's going to give us the effect that the text is actually breathing. Okay? So this is, you can be very, very creative with how you're animating things in Webflow, and I'm just giving you ideas for how you can do this. So I think we have the basic setup of, the preloader done. So let's start with the animations. Now, first of all, what I want to do is I want to hide this preloader, because otherwise I can't even see, we can't work on the homepage if now we need to change text or whatever. We've got this fixed loader on top of everything, hiding everything. So we need to hide this. So we're going to go here to the preloader wrapper and set the display to hidden. And now we can continue working on this page as if it's not here. Okay? So now let's start the animation. Let's go into the interaction. Let's start a new page, page load, and create a new interaction. And we're going to call this, let's call this show preloader. Okay. Now the first thing that we want to do when the website loads immediately, right? Did we do this immediately when page starts loading? Okay. The first thing we need to do when the page starts loading immediately, we want to show the preloader so you don't see the background. So let's select the preloader, which now you can see is hidden. And the first thing that we want to do is do hide show and set this to show display setting. Instead of hidden, we're going to set this to a flexbox, which is what it is. And we're going to tag this as set this as an initial state. So this is going to be the default before anything shows up, right? Immediately, it's going to show this, okay? This is great, but I also want to fade in this kind of like breathe text. So let's actually set it by default to start with not visible, and then animate the opacity in. So I'm going to select the breathe flex, and I'm going to go here, in this case, not hide show, because now I want to animate the property. And this is hide show is just a toggle, visible, not visible. In this case, we want to animate the opacity. So I'm going to select opacity and bring it back to 0, and also set this as an initial state. So this is our starting position. Immediately when people write the domain, this is what they'll see. Now we want the breathe to animate in. So I can just duplicate this and now set the opacity to 100. And let's set the duration to 1 second, or let's see. Let's preview this. This is a bit too fast, so let's set the duration to 1. Okay, so now basically this is what's happening. It starts, immediately shows the background, and sets the opacity of breeze to 0, and then animating it to 1. So currently, this is what we have. We basically have done the first thing. We now show the loader. Now we want to loop while it's loading. So let's close this thing, and let's create another page load. And this one, we're going to call it start an animation, create a new animation. Let's call this preloader loop. Now in this case, now we can't see it because it's hidden, right? So let me actually save this, and just temporarily, just so that we can play with the animation, I'm going to make the page load wrapper visible. So I'm going to turn on the Flexbox just because I want to see what I'm doing. And let's go back into the interaction. We have here page loader loop. And what we want here is we want to animate the breathe flex. So let's take this and move, no, where is width? Size, exactly. Okay, so we want this to, what was the width when it was big? 360? Okay, so we want to animate this to 360 over maybe 2 seconds. Yep. And then animate it backwards. Although I don't know what we started with. What was the original size? So let's head back out to see what was the original size of Breeze Flex. 230. Okay. So let's go back. Okay, so it's animating to 360 and then duplicate, animating to 230. And now let's preview this. So it's going up and down. Now this is great, and now we can set this to loop, but the only thing here, if you're looking at this, is it looks very rigid, right? It moves and then it moves back. And this is where it's a good time to talk about, easing. So you can see here that the easing is linear. Easing in animation basically means the speed in which things are moving. Actually, let me show you. Here's a great example of Webflow's easing. Okay, so linear, and let's see if we have here linear. We actually don't have here linear. Linear means it's moving in the same speed all of the time. Easing means it can start off fast and then start slow at the end. And we've got ease in and ease out, and you can see that all of these animations are the same duration, but they all behave differently, right? And I'm going to link this below if you want to play around with easing and try to see what makes sense. For us, let's do maybe ease in, ease out, and see how that works. So ease in, ease out on both of these animation. Let's play this. Okay, this looks, I like this. Let's save this and let's set this to looping and let's preview this. Okay. Yep, I like this. Honestly, it could be a bit slower if we want this to be for a yoga website, but let's say that this is okay. Okay, so now we've basically set the two initial states. Okay, let's go back and hide again the page load wrapper. Hide this, and if we preview our website, now you can see that the page loader is showing, it's fading in the breathe, and then it's looping the breathe effect. So we are good. We've created basically the two first steps. Now we basically need to do what happens when the page finishes loading. We want this to reveal the screen, so basically hide the preloader, maybe fade it out, and then maybe animate the content in. So let's go ahead and create that. So I'm going to go ahead and create another load animation, and this one when the page finishes loading. And let's call this preloader hide. And what's going to happen? So basically what I want to happen, and I can't see it because the page loader is hidden right now, but what I want is I want this to fade out. So let's select the page wrapper and let's set the opacity down to 0 over maybe 1 second. Now, basically we're done, and let's preview this. Okay, now the page finished loading so fast that it immediately faded out. So we've got two problems. Number one, I think it faded out a little bit too fast, and maybe we want at least for them to see one breathe and then fade out. The second thing is, if I'll try to click anything right now, I can't click anything. And the reason is that we still have the preloader on top of everything because it's fixed in 999Z index. It's on top of everything and I can't click anything. We just made it invisible, but it's still there blocking our cursor. I can't even select the text. So what we need to do is at the end of this fade, we need to, let's select it. We need to hide it. We need to change its display to none, hide, and now it's going to completely, remove it from the canvas. Now, the other thing I wanted to do is to give it a little bit of a delay, the first step, opacity, because again, I wanted them at least to see one kind of like maybe breathe thing. So let's delay. So even if the page loads very fast, we're still delaying them 2 seconds. I don't know if this is a best practice, but I think we just want to demo how this works. Let's save and preview this. So now it's breathing, fades out, and now you can see we have the interaction here at the back. We can select the text. The buttons work because the overlay is hidden. Okay, so this is good. The last thing I want to do is to actually have these section kind of like fade in to the view once the animation is fading out. The last part here, animate content in. And in this case, you know what? I'm going to try to set this up inside of this page loader hide. Let's go ahead and try to do that. So what I want to do is inside of the main wrapper, inside the main section, let's see where we have it. So we have the content, where content large, padding, okay. Header component. Okay, here are the two different things. We have the content on the left and the image wrapper. So what I want to do is I want to hide them, and when the page finished loading and the preloader is fading out, I want to fade them in. So let's start by actually hiding them and moving them a little bit down so that they can fade in and animate back into position. So let's go ahead and for header content, let's animate its opacity. Let's set its opacity to 0. And we'll set this as an initial state. So when the page is loading, by default, it's going to start from no opacity, and then we can fade that in. Let's do the same for the image wrapper. I'm going to set this. Actually, there's a more efficient way of doing this, which is picking up the header content, duplicating it, and then changing a target. And now I'm just changing the image target, selecting. Nope, I didn't do that. Change target and just select this one. Now both of them are hidden, and I can set this as an initial state. Okay, so now both of them are hidden, and I can now go ahead and duplicate them again. And after the fading animation is done, actually after the hide animation is done, we want to have the opacity go to 100 and the other one as well. So this is the image wrapper. Let's duplicate this. Let's take it here at the end of the animation, not together. I actually want this to be afterwards, and bring that back to opacity. So now let's see what we have here. Both of them are starting from opacity of 0. The page loader is being faded out, and after it's being faded out, and this is hidden, then these animations starts. Let's preview this. Oh, actually, we're not previewing it very well because we can't see, we don't have the page loader wrapper visible. Let's set this to visible just so that we can preview the animation that we're creating. So let's go here, page hide, hide. Okay, so now it's hiding it, waiting for 2 seconds, hiding it, show, show. Okay, is this good? Actually, I think that there's too much time where there's nothing on the screen. So let me go ahead and put this first fade in of content together with the fading out of the preloader. You see, I put them together, and it's basically changed the start time with previous action versus after previous action. Let's preview this. So now it's animating out. No, so now that didn't work well. Why it didn't work well? Because they started together and the fade out animation is 1 second of duration and this animation is half a second. So this animation finished before the loader is even shown. So let's change the delay to 3 seconds actually. And let's preview that, see if we can see that. Okay, now we can start seeing it, maybe even 2.5 seconds. Let's preview that. It's fading out and this one is showing. Okay, this is great. Okay, let's preview this again. Showing. Now the last thing I want to do is not only have them changing opacity, fading in, but I also want them to kind of like slide in. So let's pick the header content and let's add also a move animation. And again, this is the initial state. So let's set it for a little bit down, maybe 20 pixels down, and then duplicate this step and take it together when it's fading in. We're going to move it back to 0. So back into position, and let's set this to ease out. And let's preview that and see if how that looks. Okay, so it's fading into position. Let's do the same for the image. So I'm selecting the image wrapper, adding a move animation. I want this to be an initial state. I can just drag it here into the initial state and set the Y into 20 and then duplicate this so that when it's fading in together with the fade in, so I drop this on top of it, it's going to move back into 0, and we're going to set this to ease out the fade. Now let's preview this. 1, 2, and they're staggered one after another, which is nice. Okay, I think we're done. Let's save this. Let's make sure that the preloader is hidden. And let's preview breathing and fading in. All right, you can go ahead and tweak this if you don't like how long it's taking or how fast you want things to happen. But overall, I think the loading animation is now done. Now I want to show you an even easier way to create these slide-in animation, which are very, very popular. You'll see them a lot of times when you're scrolling into a new section, your content is going to slide in. And there's a lot of benefits to kind of like animating elements into view. Our brain, as humans that's how we know to direct our attention when we see something move, like a lion is jumping from the bushes, right? Our attention grabs to when things move. And so a great way to grab attention to what's more important first here, then here, is to slide things in. And so let's slide into the next section. And now I'll show you an easier way of doing this. So let's say that when I'm sliding into the next section, I want these elements just the same, like the image kind of like slide in, slide in. So let's go ahead and select maybe the image wrapper here. And I'm going to go into interaction. And this time it's an element trigger. We want this to slide in when it's getting into the view. So I'm going to add here, and we've got scroll into view. Okay, so we're just picking that, scroll into view. And now you'll see that when this is scrolled into view, we don't have to create a custom animation like we've done previously. We actually have a lot of kind of like presets coming from Webflow for appearing and disappearing. So we've got fade, slide, flipping, growing, all kinds of stuff. Let's pick slide. And you'll see that while previously we've had to customly select where is it coming from, what is animating, here it's very easy. We can just put whether this slides in or out. In this case, I want this to slide in from the bottom. And now I can preview this. You can see it's very similar to what we've created in previously. We can set up the offset, which means when is this triggering? How much of the element needs to be in the screen before this is triggered? Let's try something like 20. We can also put a delay. Let's just preview this to see how this looks. We've got the fading animation. We've got this. Now I'm sliding into view, and you see this is sliding in. Very nice. So I can set this basically to do the same. Let's select this content and let's add an element, scroll into view, and Let's do slide here as well. Because I want this to be staggered so they're not happening together, let's set the offset here to something, maybe 40. Let's see how it's going to look like. Not from the left, but from the bottom. And let's preview this and see if we like how this looks. Sliding, sliding, one after another. This is really, really great. And one thing that I do want you to know is that we can, of course, we didn't talk about this, but we can choose whether these interactions, all of them, are happening on all breakpoints. And for now, we've set them all to happen. And we can also set whether they're happening on an element or on a class. So far, we've been selecting single elements and choosing to animate them. However, for things like sliding, that perhaps you want to apply this to all of the sections on your website, you can choose classes, and then you can create special classes. You can create global class. You remember how we created global class, and you can call the class, let's say, slide in, and then every time that you'll apply the class slide in, then this interaction, if you'll do a class, for example, in this case, the class is layout 7 content, and this doesn't probably repeat anywhere else in the website, so it's not worth doing it. It's worth creating a new style, slide in, and then applying it to the class. So then you can use classes to just trigger animation that you can reuse again and again, and it's a very efficient way to create interactions on your website. The last interaction or animation that I want to show you on this website is to create a custom cursor that kind of changes its color based on where you put it with a blend mode. It's super trendy right now. And the reason actually that I want to show you this is because before I recorded this course, I've actually never done this before. And I want to show you my thinking process of how I'm trying things for the first time. So the first thing that I'm doing is using Google, and I would write something like Webflow custom cursor to know. And luckily enough, Webflow actually created a guide to explain how to do this. So we can go through this to basically understand kind of like how this is working and how they're thinking about this. And we can read about this. Basically, let me give you the gist of what's happening. They're basically creating a circle and they're hiding it, and then they're creating kind of an interaction when mouse is moving in the viewport, which is interaction we've used before, right? But not on a specific section, but on the whole website. It's going to follow your mouse, and then basically they're just going to go ahead and hide the actual mouse. That's basically what they're explaining here. So one thing I can do is just go ahead and do it. However, the next step that I do is I try to figure out whether somebody has created a clonable, because Webflow's community has created so much great stuff for free that a lot of times you don't have to create this stuff from scratch. You can find out whether somebody created something that you can just copy and paste. And in this case, I was correct. Somebody created, basically based on this tutorial, created custom cursor with a blend mod, and you can see it here. Right now, the actual cursor on my screen is not hidden, the original cursor, but you can see how it's working. And I can go ahead and clone this and then implement this on my website, which is super, super cool. You always want to check out the Made in Webflow and see the clonables there, or just use Google to search what you're looking for and just maybe write Webflow clonable or something like this. As you can see, it says clonable right here. So I went ahead and cloned basically this project. Let's basically figure out how this works, right? Sometimes they would let us know here how to use this, and sometimes inside the project. In this case, they're not really explaining, but let's see. So they have this styles embed code. Let's open up this custom code to see what's inside there. So there's basically a custom code here that is required to make sure that, yeah, even though we're not seeing the cursor, I guess the cursor can click. Okay, so we have to copy this style thing. Then we have the cursor wrapper, which is basically, yeah, just a circle with a blend mode. So we'll have to copy this thing as well. And then let's check out the interactions. Yeah, we have the mouse view in viewport. Now, I don't know if we can actually copy this. So let's see. Let's actually start with this. Now, basically, you need to have this project on your dashboard so that you will be able to copy and paste between projects. So let me go ahead and copy this and come into our website. and into the body and paste. And now we've got this here, the styles. Great. Let's go ahead and copy the cursor wrapper and bring that right here as well. And now for the interaction. So actually, let's see how the interaction works. So basically, it is page trigger, mouse moving in viewport, and then they have cursor interaction. And then the cursor is basically -50 viewport width to 50 viewport. Let's actually recreate this. So let's go to page trigger and let's go ahead to mouse move in viewport. Let's create a new one. Let's call this cursor custom cursor animation. And let's see what we have. So we're choosing the cursor itself, which you can see here on the screen. And let's do move. I think this was move, right? So move, the original one is -50 VW. All right, let's go here on the X, right? X minus, okay. So on the X, -50 VW, viewport width. And then here, it's just 50 viewport width. And I guess the same happens for this. So minus on the y-axis, correct? Minus viewport height this time, of course. So -50 viewport height, and then 50 viewport height. Okay, let's play this. Okay. You can now see that the element, the cursor element, is following my cursor on the screen. So basically, I think we're done. We're done with the basic setup. Let's preview this. Okay, you can now see already the element following my cursor. Fantastic. So that works. Now I only want to hide the normal cursor. This is something that they haven't done, but I want to do it. So the way I would do it is I would probably go into the body. And you have to remember, by the way, that now we have to copy and paste both styles and the cursor wrapper into all pages. We can't put it in the global styles because I think this is just an embed, but we need to, maybe I would put this inside, and then maybe I would turn this into a component so that we can copy and paste this on all pages if we want this to actually be activated on all pages. It's not by default going to work on the whole website. But I'm going to go to the body, and that is going to happen on all pages. I'm going to edit the body tag of all pages, and then I'm going to go here into the cursor. Down below we have cursor. Do you see it's auto? I can actually do none. And if I do none, preview, now you can see that I just have this circle, which I like. And then what happens? Okay, now when I come on top of links, the cursor changed. So I probably also need to go to links, all links, find that in the style guide and change the cursor, how cursor looks like on links. So here we got all links. Let's go and change all links. And in the cursor, yeah, just make sure it's none. Is it none? So maybe it's, I don't know if this will solve it. Otherwise, maybe we need to change it specifically on every button. Let's preview and see what happens. Okay, so here this works. On the button, it doesn't work. So I actually have to go into button and down here change this to none. Let's see if this will work. Yep, now it works. Now I can hover on top of this. I don't see the mouse cursor anymore. I should probably change the hover state on this so people can see that they're clickable. This obviously is clickable, but these are not obvious to be clickable anymore, so we need to create a hover state for them. And yeah, this is basically done. And remember, as I've mentioned, if we now because we've made changes to the cursor that apply to all pages, we have to make sure that we also go ahead and copy this to all the pages. So I'm going to go here into the classes, paste this in here, go and apply the page interaction. It does not happen by default. So mouse moving in viewport, play mouse animation, and we just pick the cursor, custom cursor animation. Let's preview this. And nope, it's not showing. For some reason, it's not showing here. So why is this not showing here? Maybe the styles is inside. What would make this not visible here? Okay, so for some reason it does not show up here. Let's try to figure out what's going on. Okay, I think I have an idea of why this might not be working. And let me check out the interaction here, custom cursor animation. Oh, you can see the problem here. It's not sure what to animate, and I know why. And it's a good thing that we talked about animating class versus animating an element, because it seems that here on the home page, we chose, when we created this animation, we chose to animate an element. And the element on the home page is not the same element, even though we copy and pasted it to a different page. On the different page, it's a different element. So what we want to make sure is that we're not affecting the selected element, but we're selecting the class. So every time that we have cursor, it's going to animate. And let's see that this is applied to all of them here. We affect the class, save. I think this will solve the problem. Let's give this a try. Let's go into the classes page. And let's give this a try. And nope, it's still not animating here. Let's open up the interaction panel here. And it is animating. Now the interaction is not the problem. So what might be the problem? Let me try one more thing, and that is trying to put the cursor wrapper before the body wrapper like we have it on the home page. And let's try now. Okay, now everything works just fine. Okay, so you will remember I've mentioned earlier when we were talking about the absolute positioning that sometimes what is rendered first and then rendered afterwards. In this case, it did affect the interaction and how it's working, I guess with the Z index, what's on top of what. So you do see that it's great to be able to take resources and copy and paste them and apply them on your website. Sometimes you'll need to kind of like debug and make sure that everything works fine, but I still think that this is a huge time saver, the Webflow resources, and you should definitely check out and try to use them and incorporate them in your own website. Okay, I think we're done with animations and interaction. Feel free to duplicate this and apply this to all pages of your website. With that, I'm feeling ready to move on and making sure that the website is responsive and looks great on every breakpoint. See you on the next video.